So we are going to be reading from our February issue of Storyworks. So make sure you scroll down a little bit and you'll see the February edition. So make sure that you click on that. And then you'll see our story for the week, the Halifax explosion. So we're going to click on that. And we'll get started with some vocabulary. All right, so one of the words we're going to hear in our story this week is cargo. So cargo is a noun, and it means something carried from one place to another by boat. So if you look in the picture, you can see all the cargo on that big ship traveling from one place to another. Our next word you're going to hear is collapsed. It's a verb that means fell down. So a person can collapse, a building can collapse. So anything can really fall down. So anything that falls down, you can use the word collapsed. All right, debris. So debris is a noun, and it means pieces that are left after something has been destroyed. So we can see that this building probably collapsed. And you can see all the debris that was left behind, all the broken pieces. Harbor is a noun, and it's an area of calm water near land where ships can dock. So it's usually, you can see how the water's really calm, it's not moving, there's no waves or anything like that. And you'll find a lot of these near the shore. So you can see here there's a dock in the picture, or a pier. And then you can see where all the boats are kind of docked and they have their anchors down to stay in place. So that is harbor. Our next word is military. It's a noun. Armed forces such as the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, Air National Guard, those are all military. Shattered is a verb, broken apart into tiny pieces. I would be crying if my phone looked like that. I'm sure some of you guys would too, or a TV screen or computer screen. That is shattered. So you can see it's broken in all these tiny pieces, and that is not easily fixable or cheap to fix. All right, tsunami. We've heard this word before when we talked about weather in our science unit. It's a noun, a large wave that causes a lot of damage. So you can see where the ocean pulls. What the ocean did was pull all of that water out and brought it back up. And you can see where that wave is about to just crash down over the land. It's a lot of water, and it'll cause a lot of damage. All right, and that is it for our vocabulary words for the week. So let's get started with our story. All right, the Halifax explosion. 100 years ago, a disaster in Canada killed thousands and shocked the world. So remember, as we read this article, we need to pay attention to the details to help us understand what happened and why. So remember, this is nonfiction. Noble Driscoll, 13, woke up in a pile of rocks and crushed concrete. All he could see around him were heaps of burned brick and ash. Where was his family? Where were his friends? Noble thought he might be the last person alive. It was the morning of December 6, 1917. Just minutes before, things had been normal in Halifax and Dartmouth. These are two cities in Nova Scotia, which is in Canada. They sit on the Atlantic Ocean. Between them is a narrow harbor. So remember, if you don't remember what harbor is, look below in the highlighted area and it tells you. So a harbor is an area of calm water near land where the ships dock. So there was a narrow harbor. That morning, people were busy. Moms served up bowls of oatmeal. Kids gathered their school books. Dads went to work. In Noble's neighborhood in Halifax, horses clip-clopped down the streets. pulling wagons behind them. Factories made flour, beer, metal items, and more. At the harbor, men carried cargo onto giant ships. Remember, cargo is something that's carried from one place to another by boat. It's usually large, very large items. Noble could see the harbor from his backyard. He loved to watch the ships pass by. So as you can see here, here's the boy that we're reading about right now. There's Noble Driscoll right there. And you can see that obviously we're going to be talking about some kind of explosion. You can see the big cloud of dust and things like that in the harbor. Let's see what's happening next. Oh, let me get back. Most belonged to the military, it says. So remember, the military is armed forces such as Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Air Force, all of those things. They were carrying supplies and soldiers to Europe. A terrible war, World War I, had been fought there for 3 years. On one side of the war was a group of countries that included Great Britain, Canada, France, Russia, and the United States. On the other side was a group of countries led by Germany. Millions of soldiers had died in bloody battles. So, what were most of the ships near Noble's house carrying? So we might have to go back to the next page. And right here in this paragraph, it says, men carried cargo onto giant ships. So they were carrying that cargo. Crash, whoosh! On that morning of December 6th, one of the ships near Halifax was the Mont Blanc. There was something about the Mont Blanc that only a few people knew. It was loaded with dangerous chemicals. It also had barrels filled with benzol. This is a liquid similar to gasoline, and it can blow up easily. Around 8:30 a.m., the Mont Blanc entered Halifax Harbor. At the same time, a ship called the Emo was leaving the harbor. The Emo ended up in the way of the Mont Blanc. As the two ships sped towards each other, both pilots blared their whistles, but it was too late. Crash! The Emo smashed into the Mont Blanc. The barrels of benzol fell over and splashed open. The metal on the two ships scraped together, and sparks flew. And then, whoosh! The benzol burst into flames. Francis Mackey, the Mont Blanc's pilot, knew there was nothing he could do. Soon the rest of the chemicals on the ship would blow up. The crew could stay on the boat and die, or they could get off the ship. What happened when the two ships crashed into each other? Well, we can look back on the other page, and we know that as they smashed into each other, the barrels of benzol fell over and the metal scraped together, which made sparks, and that benzol burst into flames. So if you look on this left side over here of our page, you can see the Halifax Harbor. It's quite skinny, so there's not a lot of places you can go, and with big old ships like that, they don't move very fast. So it's not easy for them to steer clear of certain objects and other things if they're not careful. So you can see why that probably happened. So, and they also show us up top a before picture of the Halifax harbor and the surrounding area. You can see there's trains and houses and buildings, all that stuff, and then there's the harbor in the background. Ripped to pieces. Mackey and the Mont Blanc crew jumped into lifeboats. They rowed toward the shore. Mackey waved and shouted at the other ships. He was trying to warn them of the danger, but no one seemed to notice. Back at Noble's house, Noble saw flames from the Mont Blanc flicking towards the sky. He walked toward the harbor for a better look. The Mont Blanc was now floating towards Noble's neighborhood. And at about 9 a.m., the ship exploded. It was ripped into pieces. The explosion reached likely 9,000 degrees. That's 4 times hotter than lava, which lava comes from volcanoes. People could feel the ground shake 250 miles away. In Dartmouth and Halifax, ships flipped over, trains flew off the rails, factories collapsed. Remember, collapse means to fall down. Doors flew off houses, trees snapped in two, windows shattered, which means to break apart in tiny pieces, and that glass, those tiny pieces shot through the air. The shockwave lifted Noble into the air. He landed near his school. He became unconscious, which unconscious means not awake because of an injury. I don't know if we missed that one somehow, I think. So that means you're still alive, but you're not awake. You're almost in like a sleeping state. For about 10, minutes, the sky seemed to open up. Black rain fell. It was a mix of burned benzol, melted metal, and other debris, which remember, debris are the pieces left over after something has been destroyed. And actually, let's go back real quick. So this was a before picture, right, that we talked about, and this was after that explosion. So along the waterfront, Halifax, before the explosion, was over here to the left. Many houses were made of wood, which caught fire after the explosion toppled kitchen stoves. So this is a view of after the explosion. You can barely see any of the houses that were there. So what happened to the Mont Blanc? So we know that Mont Blanc, when that benzol caught fire, it caused everything else to heat up, and it caused a ginormous explosion, and it was burst into pieces. More horror. When Noble woke up, he saw that most of the buildings were gone. Fires burned everywhere. His jacket had been blown off. His skin was blackened by the rain. There was glass in his hair. But there was more horror to come. The explosion set off a huge wave that crashed through Dartmouth and Halifax. This tsunami, which remember is a large wave that caused a lot of damage, knocked over more buildings. It swept people away. Luckily for Noble, the wave did not reach him. In a daze, he headed back towards his house. Only moments before, his family had been going about their morning routine. Now there was almost nothing left of their house. And one of Noble's 13 siblings, his little brother Gordon, was missing. So what scary event was caused by the explosion? Well, we can read back to the paragraphs before, and it caused that tsunami, that huge wave. Looking for answers. The explosion of Mont Blanc was one of the most powerful in history. Thousands of people had lost homes and jobs. About 2,000 people had died. At least 9,000 had been injured. People were angry. They wanted answers. Many blamed Mackey. He was even sent to jail. He later returned to sea, but no one trusted him. Experts now say the accident was not his fault. Today, Halifax is a popular, busy city, but the explosion is still an important part of its history. Mention it to nearly anyone, and he or she can probably tell you about a relative who lived through it. As for Noble, sadly, his brother Gordon was never found. The Driscolls went on as best as they could. They lived for a while in a nearby town. They welcomed a new baby in 1919. That same year, they returned to Halifax. By then, World War I had ended. People everywhere, including the Driscolls, were ready to rebuild their lives. Noble grew up and got married. He managed a store. He lived in a house near the childhood home he lost in the explosion. In that neighborhood today, there is a bell tower at the top of a hill overlooking the harbor. Each December 6th, the bell rings to remind everyone of the day the sky shattered. So what is Halifax like today? So if we look right back to that paragraph, it says today they have a bell tower, and they have someone on December 6th every year ring it to remind everyone of that day, of that terrible explosion. So now, of course, they rebuilt their town, so it doesn't probably look like an explosion ever happened there. But now, of course, they have a bell tower just to remind people of that horrible day. So let's take a look at some of these pictures up top here. So this is a wartime ship. So it says, like many ships used in World War I, the Mont Blanc was not originally built for war. Mont Blanc's pilot, Francis Mackey, which is this little picture right here, was one of the most respected pilots in Halifax with 24 years of experience and no accidents. So here's a picture. You can see Mont Blanc's written on the side or on the back of it there. And that's what the Mont Blanc looked like. And then you can see people packing things onto the railroad trains. And then this little picture here, it says relief efforts. Food, clothing, and medicine poured into Halifax and Dartmouth. In the days after the explosion, many people stayed in their damaged homes, covering broken windows with tar paper to try to keep out the cold. Some took shelter in nearby towns where people opened their homes to survivors. Others lived in tents, the ones pictured here, while temporary housing was being built. Wow, that is just crazy to think about having to live through that. I would be terrified. So I couldn't imagine what Noble was going through. He was only 13 years old, so I couldn't even imagine going through that young. So, but I mean, at least he didn't lose all of his family members. It's sad though that he lost his little brother. So, all right, guys. Well, that is our story for the week. So make sure that you go back and read through and you pause and think at those questions. They're going to help you out for this week's assignments. And I look forward to hearing you guys tell me about it. All right. See you soon, guys.